Japanese in Kyoto sunrise, Japanese in Kyoto sunrise.
Welcome to Book Time with Ryan. I am Ryan, and today I'll be talking about Michael Crichton's Rising Sun. My copy was only 50 cents. That's a pretty good deal. And I read this because recently I read and did a review for The Informant, so check that out. And he mentioned in that book, which is nonfiction, this work of fiction. And I thought, hey, this might be a really good thriller. I have already read 2 other books of Michael Crichton's, Jurassic Park and The Lost World. And I said, you know what? I like those. Why don't I try this out? And I did, and I liked it. I think it's so far my favorite Michael Crichton book. And that's pretty good because he's written a lot of good books. I haven't read that many, so maybe it'll change. I did not know what to expect with this. I thought that this was going to be kind of a business-related thriller in Japan, and it really took place in LA. So what we have here, this is written in 1992, and I'm going to provide a little bit of, I think, background later into the real world. But it opens with an interview with Internal Affairs and a lieutenant in the LA Police Department named Peter Smith. And he works in Special Services, the Special Services Office, I think. Basically, he's there to provide support for other officers when dealing with foreign nationals or dignitaries. And we start the book with a murder at the Nakamoto Tower. There's a party going on for the grand opening of this huge cutting-edge building in LA, the Nakamoto Tower, on the 45th floor, where the party's going on. But on the 46th floor is kind of the executive suite. It's for all the bigwigs, the C-suite. And we find out that there is a dead woman, a white woman who is attractive, and she is dead on a table in the conference room there. Now, nobody was supposed to be up there. But Smith is brought in because the Japanese are being pushy and trying to get into the crime scene because they want to protect the company and the company's name. The first officer that responded, or the first detective that responded, is a guy named Graham. And Graham has a little bit of a history with possible racism. His father, I think it was his father's grandfather, was tortured in Japan during World War II. But he's generally just a little, let's say the best of life has already passed him by, and he is pretty frustrated and rude because of it. On the way to the crime scene, Smith picks up a cop who's semi-retired but has a lot of connections in the Japanese community, and his name is John Connor. And he is a captain and has lived in Japan, knows Japanese, and is an asset, really knows the culture. So they go to Nakamoto Tower. It's clear there's going to be a lot of pressure from above, and it's already being experienced by different members of the community, especially in the police force. This party has brought in big stars like Madonna and Tom Cruise, and senators and trade representatives, and just a lot of big names. There is a pending possible buyout of a chip maker. I think the chip maker. Or something, I don't know. Some kind of chip something. Some kind of tech thing. In 92. So it was probably this big. So it's a very sensitive case. And they're trying to figure out, how did this woman die? And they start tracking that down. Where she came from, what she was doing, who she's associated with. They had access to cameras and surveillance footage, but that's been tampered with. The kind of attitude in the LA area, and probably a lot of the United States, is the Japanese are taking over. There's a trade deficit with Japan, between the United States and Japan, and they've taken to investing in U.S. companies, basically buying out U.S. companies, and some of those companies are probably fairly sensitive. And there's this pushback by some that we are giving up our ability to protect the nation, that some of these technologies that we've given away, basically, it's going to come back to bite us because we can't produce certain things that we need to keep our country competitive and strong. And the U.S. is in decline in 1992 when this book was written, or published at least. So there's a lot of ins and outs, and I don't want to ruin that, but there are a lot of questions on who did what. Connor's able to leverage a lot of his context and his understanding of the culture to figure out who is doing what. There's senators involved. There are different business families involved. There are different cultural issues about honor, lying, competition, business is war. That kind of stuff is going on. Our main character, Peter, who the book is told from his point of view, he's single, recently divorced, maybe in the last couple of years, divorced. He was a detective for 5 years, went to the press office, which I like because I work with press. And actually, some of his concerns and his input is really true, in my experience. And then he went to the special services section, or special services office, whatever it's called. He has some stuff in his past, which is a liability. It becomes a liability. Connor has some stuff in his past, especially some of his relationships with the Japanese community. And there's just a lot of pressure, including through papers. Is this investigation and the targets of the investigation, is this racially motivated? Is it true? Are the players, the different detectives and police officers, do they have some kind of ulterior motive? That kind of stuff. Leadership wants it done. The entire book basically is 3 days. Yeah, 3 days. The entire book's 3 days. There are chapters that they're not labeled chapters, it's just a way to break up the book, but there are books within it. So each book is a day, like day 1, day 2, night of day 2, day 3. I like this book. I gave it 5 stars. I did feel like there was some fairly anti-Japanese, I won't say rhetoric, not about the people themselves necessarily, but about the economic situation. There's even an afterword in here from Michael Crichton where he talks about the need of the United States to get a handle on its economy, on its spending, deficit spending, on its debt, and to be responsible. And that a country needs to own its economy. It needs to own the markets. It needs to own what it's doing. He felt like the United States wasn't doing that, and that Japan was really pulling ahead. And it was at the time. Now it's crazy, and I don't know when he finished writing this, but I feel like this event is not really captured in this book. Beginning in 91, the Japanese economy kind of collapsed, and it was followed by lost decades, called the Lost Decade or Lost Decades, where there was really anemic growth, like 1%, far behind other countries, even a slowdown in growth in the population. And that really hasn't totally been overcome. Even now, 20, 30 years later, it really hurt Japan. So it would be interesting to see what this book would look like if it was written a year or two later, or 5 years later. And if the Japanese would be the protagonist, because I don't know if they would. And they wouldn't be now. Now it would be China. A lot of kind of political discussion, too, about how the United States was allowing a lot of this to happen because, at least right after World War II, Japan was seen as an important ally against the encroachment of Russia, especially in the Pacific. But the Japanese economy really took off. And this was published in 92, 91. There was an asset bubble collapse. A bubble popped. Many asset classes just lost 60. I think it was 60% of their value, or I I don't know. It was bad. It was bad. I just Googled it because I wanted to see. I knew that something happened in the 90s. I didn't know exactly when it kicked off. But I think it probably kicked off or really became obvious after this book was published. So where there were a lot of concerns about the Japanese pulling ahead of the United States, I think it became clear later in the 90s that Japan had a lot of its own issues and a lot of its own concerns in its economy and the way it was handling things. And that would have changed a lot in this book. It's a work of fiction. I mentioned that I read this because I saw references in The Informant. There are some comments in here about business approaches in Japan and how price fixing and collusion are common, which is kind of interesting because one of the big cases in The Informant, which again was published in the 90s. No, The Informant's from 2000. Sorry. The Informant was published in 2000, but it's discussing activities from 91 to 98. And included in some of the wrongdoing, some of the illegal activities was price fixing with Japan. And this mentions price fixing and how common it is in Japan. So I do think this book is probably dated now. I mean, it's definitely dated. There are cell phones, there are car phones, big car phones, pagers. There certainly is some older technology, but there's some pretty interesting stuff, forward-looking ideas. And I liked it. I think some people will see there's so much commentary about Japan by a lot of different characters, and you wonder. I was alive in the 90s, but I don't remember this that much. So I don't remember if it was at the forefront of all these conversations, if people were really worried about Japan, or if that is just Michael Crichton finding ways to get the message about Japanese economy and Japanese business out there. Because it seemed like a lot of people knew different numbers, and I don't know. The other thing I don't know is there's a little bit in the back about different sources that Michael Crichton used. What I'm not sure of is there's a lot of descriptions in the book about Japanese culture and the way individuals and businesses operate, how they approach competition and confrontation and individuals and actions and behavior. And it seems very thorough, but I just don't know if it's true because I don't know much about Japan. I think it would be interesting if anybody's watching this and you're from Japan or familiar with Japan and Japanese culture and you've read this book. Is it accurate? Does it seem like Michael Crichton had a good understanding, good feeling for Japanese culture, or is it a lot of BS and assumptions? I don't know. I don't really know how to go about doing that in a timely fashion either, figuring that out. So I'm just going to pass it off to you. Have you read this? Are you aware of Japanese culture, and are you Japanese or Japanese American? And is it accurate? I do know some Japanese people, so I might ask them. So that's it. Thanks for being here today. Again, Michael Crichton's Rising Sun. There is a movie. I'm not sure if I'm going to watch it. I haven't watched it before. And actually, the character Mark Whitaker the person Mark Whitaker in The Informant watches the movie too, and kind of refers to the book in the movie. He preferred the book, Rising Sun. So that's it here. Thanks for being here today, and I will talk to you later. Sayonara.
Cherry blossom float along, flutter, 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 flutter down